En SBS, Librería Internacional, estamos comprometidos con la educación y la difusión de la cultura a través de materiales físicos y digitales. Somos una de las cadenas más grandes de Sudamérica, orientada a producir y distribuir libros de idiomas, académicos y de interés general, así como bibliografía clásica e imprescindible. Hemos consolidado nuestra presencia en Perú con librerías ubicadas estratégicamente en los departamentos de Lima, Cusco, Arequipa, Trujillo, Piura, Chiclayo, Iquitos y Huancayo. Además de una librería online, donde presentamos una gran variedad de títulos que podrás recibir desde la comodidad de tu hogar, gracias a nuestro servicio de delivery a nivel nacional. SBS Librería Internacional. Soluciones para quien enseña y para quien aprende.
Hello. It's very nice to be kind of with you and to be talking to you. Okay, I've had the signal I can go on. So thanks to Ellie and Samantha for helping me with this. Susan Holden, and as you see, I have done and still do a lot of things. I've been a teacher trainer, a writer, an editor, and a publisher. And all these things have made me think a lot about learning and teaching English in different ways and in different places. Now, I'm talking to you from Scotland. Here we're 6 hours in advance of you, so what you can see over my head is a sky which will get darker as we talk. I wish I was talking to you live in Peru. I came to Lima 2 years ago and enjoyed it very much and was hoping to come back to actually work with teachers live, but obviously something happened which made that impossible. So this is the second best, to be talking via a link from Scotland to Peru. And if we can have the first slide, please. What we're going to talk about today, or rather I'm going to talk about, is teaching English today. And I've put English in brackets because I think a lot of what I say, or I hope a lot of what I say, will relate to teaching generally. Because one of the things as a language teacher is very often one forgets that what one is doing is actually very similar to somebody teaching other things. So that's why I've put the English in brackets. The reason I've used the words past, present, and future is because I think we're in a particular moment in time. All of us, depending how long we've been teaching, can think back to what we did, how we began teaching. Now we're teaching in a reality which is probably a little different, or maybe very, very different from the way when we began teaching. And as good teachers who think ahead and plan things, we should be thinking about the future. So what I thought it would be useful to do this afternoon, this evening, is to think about teaching a language, think about teaching English in relation to the past, the present, and the future. And to think not just about the language, but about the people who are involved and the place where the learning and teaching happens. So that's the reason for the title of this talk, Teaching English Today, Past, Present and Future. Next slide. Now, I said I was talking to you from Scotland, and if it had been a bit earlier in the day and it hadn't been raining, and actually if it was a bit earlier in the year, this is what you would see from outside the window behind me. I live in a small town, equidistant from Edinburgh and Glasgow, like that. It's a tourist area. There are lots of rivers and lochs, Scottish word for lake, big hills, small mountains, big mountains. And so it's an area where a lot of tourists and visitors come. So it's exposed to different cultures and language needs, but it's also a small town and quite inward looking. And this is something I'm very conscious of when I talk to people about what I do. And they say, you're going to Peru? You're going to Brazil? You're talking to teachers in Hungary? And you can see that there isn't actually much reality for them in places which they've never been to. And this is something I'm going to come on to, the place of language and culture, and how it affects what we're doing. Next, please. Another thing some of you may know about me, and in fact, when I came to Lima 2 years ago, this book had just come out. It's called Teaching English Today. It's English, not in brackets, and subtitled Contexts and Objectives. And this is a book I wrote with a Brazilian colleague, Vini Nobre, and what is on the screen is the European edition, but there is actually an edition published by SBS. And what we were doing 2 years ago, both Vinny and I'm older than Vinny, but both of us have been teaching for a long time. We were thinking about teaching. We were thinking about the sort of questions that teachers might want to ask their colleagues, and the sort of questions that trainees on a training course might want to discuss among them friends, among their group with their friends and colleagues, or might want to ask the trainer. And we also thought that it's useful as a teacher trainer to be able to ask trainees questions, ask them to think about something, rather than thinking that if you're the trainer, you know everything. Because one of the things I've learned over the years, I think I know less and less as I get older. So one of the things we did in this book was provide a text, but actually also provide a lot of questions in the margins to do discussion, work in groups, to think about, to ask a colleague. And having done this 2 years ago, I find this is something when I'm doing talks and training sessions, this asking questions is something that I find much more productive than me talking about what I do, because my reality is very different from your reality. And in fact, each of you, and I don't know how many of you there are, and I can't see you, but if we were live, I could see you. Each of you is actually living and working within a different reality. So we're going to be asking lots of questions. It's not going to be me talking all the time. I think that's extremely boring. So I will talk a little bit and then I'll ask you some questions. And if this were a live session, obviously we could have a discussion, but please feel free to use the chat box to put your thoughts in, things you agree with, things you don't agree with. It's a way of keeping a record of some of the things you've said. So it'll be as interactive as I can possibly make it. Okay, next slide. So we're going to focus on people because language and people are linked. We're going to focus on place, where teaching, where learning, where the use of language happens, and we'll talk a bit about language itself. Okay? So when I say people, I mean teachers, learners, trainers, trainees, users, anybody who is involved in language. When I talk about place, that is where the teaching and the learning and the using of language goes on. Now, present day, our reality, that might be face to face, more and more it's online, and actually sometimes, and increasingly, I suspect, looking forward to the future, it'll be a mixture. So as a teacher or a learner of a language, it's important to think about those aspects and think, how's that going to affect what I do in the classroom? How is this going to affect me as a learner? Am I actually more comfortable listening to myself on a computer screen, or do I actually need people around me? And again, the answer is going to be different for all of us. But the place where we teach, the place where our students learn, the place where we interact is changing. And this, I think, as a teacher, a writer, whoever you are, this is important. And the language itself, I think, needs a bit of thought. And this I'll come back to in the second half of the talk. Why do we use language? What is its purpose? What's the context? And who are we using it with? Who are the people involved? Okay. And the most important thing of all, of course, is the date, August 2021, because all the things that we think about and talk about now, today, are peculiar to this point in time. If I had been with you 2 years ago, or as I was with you 2 years ago in August 2019, a lot of the material would have been different because we were living in a different world. So that date is important, and I'll keep coming back to that. So I use the words learners, trainees, teachers, and trainers, and I think in probably not just language teaching, I think in teaching generally, the education world, the teaching world generally, there is a danger of giving people's labels and forgetting that actually we're all people, first of all. Okay? And the same thing goes for our learners, that the learners are people too, and they have the same likes, dislikes, problems. They're affected by where they are, personal matters, just in the same way as we are as teachers. And again, that's something I'll come back to in the second half. So just going back to the date check, 12th of August 2020, 12th of August 2022, and the next slide, what divides them? Now that's a silly question, it's obvious. Something happened in that 1920, which is summed up by this picture. Now, what I've done is, I told you I lived in a little town in Scotland. By the way, I don't have a Scottish accent. I'm a mixture. My mother was Welsh. My father was half English, half Scottish. So I'm a very typical British mixture. I went round in this little town taking photographs of the kind of signs, notices that I could see put up in shops. And these introduce, and I'm sure you have exactly the same in Spanish in Peru, because this is something actually that is international, that in each country, sadly, there is a need for signs like this. And what has happened, the COVID-19 thing that has happened, has introduced something in terms of communication and our lives, which in a funny way is both very, very personal. You know, how is it affecting you and your family? or you and your students, but is also international. And this introduces quite a lot into how international communication can use what is happening in the present to provide a framework for communication. So this says social distancing. They obviously weren't too sure about 1 or 2 meters. Here's another one, social distancing. And again, these signs, and I suspect any that you have in your own towns and cities, these are actually quite interesting to look at, even if they don't have to be in English, whatever language they are, because they're trying to get over a really important message. And these are actually from the beginning of our lockdown last year, when people were very nervous, very insecure. The government, and one of the problems of living in Scotland is we have a government in London and another one in Edinburgh, and they don't always say the same thing, so it's very confusing. But the government or governments were sending out messages, and at the beginning, people weren't quite sure, what does it mean? So looking at the way a message, and an important message, is put over, both through language and visually, is, I think, something that we can use in the classroom. Is it direct language? Is it warning? Is it polite? What is the nature of the language? Okay, next one. Here's another example. This is from the co-op, which is the cooperative, big food shops. We have a one-way system in place. So when this started, you could only walk in one direction around the store. Please stay safe, follow the arrows, and maintain social distancing. And social distancing is a phrase that I had never heard used in English before last year. So one of the effects of COVID, the pandemic, has been the effect, certainly as far as English is concerned, an effect on the language. There are new phrases, new language coming in, and that again is something I'll come back to in a little while. Okay, next one. So, date check. Past, present, future, from 2020 to 2022 and on. And what we need to think about from a teaching point of view is, what are the similarities and what are the differences? So, first of all, think about yourself. Think about yourself now as a person, and think about yourself a year ago. Okay, next one. Next one. And think of yourself as a professional. What are you? Because as I've said, there is a danger that we label ourselves as teachers, professionals, and we forget about the personal bit. And some of you will be parents, you'll be grandparents, you'll be children, you'll be friends, all sorts of things. And I think one of the things that the pandemic has done is to make the personal aspect of our lives and our relationships with other people much, much more important and obvious than they have been. So I said I was going to ask questions as we went along, and here's the first one, and I'll ask it and then I'll give you 20-30 seconds just to think about it, and if you want to put anything in the chat box, do. So think about yourself as a person. First of all, how did you first hear about COVID-19 and how did it change your daily life? And I'll give you 20-30 seconds to think about that. The way it changed my daily life was that we weren't allowed to go out. We couldn't meet anybody. It was quite difficult to go shopping. Right, so Jean-Paul, the first time I heard about COVID-19 was in the news, international news. Yes, me too, Jean-Paul. Yes, yeah. Any other? Yeah. Everything has changed. Yes. We keep the social distancing because of the pandemic. Yes. Okay, another question for you. What about you? Think of yourself again. How did you adapt? Think about when you first heard about it. Think about how you had to adapt your life. And what did you learn from doing so? Right. Dramatically changed my way of living, being most of the time at home, not being able to share with friends and outside family. Yes, I think this is the human aspect which has affected all of us, whoever we are, whether we're big families, small families, old, young, medium. This idea, this feeling of being alone and not being able to communicate and have relationships with people in the way that we've always taken for granted. So this kind of solitary feeling, I think, has affected a lot of us. Yes, it was hard to be just at home. I learned to value life. Yes, yes, yes. It's interesting. And maybe it's made us all a bit more philosophical or realistic. I realize I'm able to give virtual classes. Okay, Sandra, that's you as a teacher. Okay, we'll come to that in a second. Third question. Can we have question 3? Which is, how has your normal work changed? And what aspects of it will you try to keep in the future? Now, somebody put something about teaching, which I can't find. Oh, having code classes because students do not participate as before. Yes. So our communication, our relationship with the students has changed, isn't it? Because if they have to keep a distance, here in Scotland, they are able to go back to school now. And in fact, I have a primary school next door to the house, and they start again on Tuesday next week. But whether they're in a classroom or whether they are teaching learning like this, the students themselves are distanced from each other in a way that it wasn't in the past. And the question that I think is important in question 3 is, what aspects of it will you try to keep in the future? Now, I don't know how many of you taught online before all this happened. I gave lectures, talks occasionally, if I couldn't travel physically somewhere, usually because of time or money or something, but very, very rarely. So for me, teaching is about being in a room with people and talking to them, and the same with teacher training. Then having to adapt to doing things online has made me think. I mean, what is effective? What's not effective? And these are rhetorical questions because only you can answer from your own point of view. But if you think about the way you're teaching now, and in the future, if you can go back to old style normal classrooms, what are the things that you've learned from the last year, 18 months, that you would want to retain? Are there some good things about online teaching? From your learner's point of view, are there some good things for them? Are there things that actually we might like to retain in the future? And these, as I say, are all rhetorical questions, and I'm looking forward to reading the chat after all this, because I can't read it and talk at the same time. But there's some fantastic comments coming up. Continue training using technology better and for the classes. And that phrase, using technology better, Mercedes, that rings a bell with me, because I remember the first time I used this, everything went wrong. And I panicked and thought, oh my goodness, why can't I just be in the same place with these people talking to them? All of us, I think, have got used to overcoming the technology and making the technology work for us. I think for a lot of us, when we began, that technology was controlling us. And I would hope, as creative teachers, we're now controlling the technology. And as Carmen says, maybe continue working online because she loves doing it. So I think this sort of critical thinking is important. Now, Jocelyn says using a variety of interactive platforms seem to be interesting for my students. And, that is probably, Jocelyn, I don't know, but you probably weren't doing that 2 years ago. Now there's this possibility. And of course, what has happened is that as we as teachers and teacher trainers have got used to using technology, so have our students. They were probably ahead of us anyway, if you're dealing with young students, adolescents. But technology is part now of all our lives. Okay, next slide. So back to reality. As I said, I think what COVID has done is introduce language which we probably wouldn't have expected to be using. For example, please wear your mask. Now, I wonder if any of you have ever taught the word mask. Maybe if you're doing a Shakespearean play or something. But now a mask is part of all our lives. We have to wear them when we go to a shop, we go near people. So that's a reminder that the language that we need to equip our students with now, if we want to reflect the real world, is probably different from the language of 2 years ago. And that is a warning, I think, for people who, textbook authors and publishers, that maybe the language of textbooks has to change a bit to reflect reality. Okay, next slide. So, thinking of personal and professional changes. Think back, think now, what has changed and what is the same? So, where do you teach? How do you teach? How do you prepare for teaching? Is preparing to do a lesson online different from preparing to do a lesson with students around you? Do you have to think of other things? Do you have to prepare for using, I'll call it the technology, the equipment? Do you have to prepare for it going wrong? What happens if suddenly the electricity goes down? Something cuts out or something. And what are the positives and negatives? What can you learn from the things you're doing now that can be useful in the future, when hopefully we'll all have a choice, or much more of a choice than we have now, about how we do things? Okay? So in terms of personal life, one can ask just the same things about oneself. Where do you live? What are you doing? What are your priorities? And what are the positives and negatives of how life is at the moment? And the next one, staying with people. The fact that everything, all the answers to those questions apply to people, so both learners and teachers. I think, you know, there is quite a danger sometimes as a teacher that you know you're a person, I know I'm a person, but one sometimes forgets that the learners, our students, are people. They're not just learners, and they therefore have been through the same life-changing experiences that we have. They will have reacted in different ways depending on their situations, age, and so on. But if we're trying to think how to best teach them in the future, we need to be thinking about them as people. Okay? And just like us, they will be affected by what's happened in their families. Has a member of their family died? You know, I think far more people I know here have had a family member die in the last, or be very ill in the last 18 months than is normal. So families have had to get used to losing a member of the family, which a lot of people were not prepared for. So thinking about all of us, learners and teachers, as people and our lifestyles, I think is important as the context in which we're working. Okay. Can we have the next one? Can we? Yes, that's it. Okay, good. This is just a warning. There is an awful tendency when we're talking about students that we give them labels, and depending on the context in which you're working, you may refer to, oh, I've got beginners this year, or oh no, I'm teaching advanced. Actually, they're adults. I've got a business class. I'm teaching a general class. Or maybe the textbook you says it's for A2 or B1 or B2 or intermediate or what have you. And because one does this professionally, and it's so easy to do. I mean, if I've been writing something, I've been a publisher saying to me, Susan, what level is it for? And I'll say, well, it's for teenagers who, you know, no, is it A2 or B1? Well, I don't. It depends. It depends on what the task is, and I think when we're talking about learners, we need to remind ourselves that they may be beginner, they may be adult, they may be pre-primary, they may be anything, but they are affected by the place, time scales, how much time they have to learn, the resources that they have available to them. Their own objectives for learning. I when I'm writing something or training teachers, I put a lot of stress on objectives. Why are you doing something? Because it's very easy as a teacher, I think, to simply go through a textbook or online material and, you know, it's lesson 1, lesson 2, lesson 3. And we do it because actually it's there in the syllabus, it's there in the curriculum, that's what the textbook says we should be doing. And we don't actually question enough about what is the objective? Why am I doing this? Is it relevant to my students? Is there a better way of doing it? And I think my own perception, and talking to colleagues here and in other places, is that one of the good things that's come out of the experience we've all been in is that because we've had to make decisions, you know, how am I going to teach? What am I going to ask them to do online? Perhaps it makes us more questioning about our own objectives and our learners' objectives than we have been in the past. So that's something to think about, I think. Okay, next one. So, coming back to you, what about you? You have a teaching job, or hopefully will still have a teaching job. You also have a life, and your life is personal, but it will feed into your job. I mean, it may be silly things like having to rush your lesson a little bit because you've got to get to the supermarket to get home in time to make a meal or something. That although we can be professional, wanting to focus absolutely on what we're doing, we are people, as I keep saying, and we're affected by what's going on around us, by our worries, by if you have a child who's sick and you're trying to teach at the same time, that's important. We're affected by the resources we have. One of the sad things I heard on the radio here today, this is the time of year in Britain when secondary school students get their exam results from the penultimate and the last, the leaving year of school. And, you know, I'm sure it's the same in Peru. Most of them have been learning online. And this, of course, means that the kids whose families can actually afford computers and internet links and so on have actually been much more supported than those whose families can't afford those things. And I know families in big cities here, Edinburgh and Glasgow, where families are living in just 2 or 3 rooms in an apartment block. And it's all very well for the school, or more likely the government, to say, oh, they can do things online. But if there's only one laptop or one tablet between a family, and the only place they can use it is the kitchen table, and they're shut up there all day with their parents, and the teacher has to try and find something for them to do. You know, I'm painting a black picture. But the sad thing that came out on the news this morning with the exam results was that children from better off families who could afford extra support came up with much higher exam results than those in medium or quite low families. And of course, this is about life. It's not just the exam. It affects whether they can go to university, what they can do, whether they can get a job. So resources available for learning are, I think, something we all need to think about. And what support you need, as well as what support you can give your students. So this led me on to think about teacher training. Next one. Right. Training courses. Now, if you were going to be on the receiving end of an online training course for you as a teacher, what would you want it to provide for you? And would it be different from a training course in the past? And what are the similarities and differences? I'll give you a couple of minutes just to think about that and possibly write things down. Oh, see. So Carmen has more time to attend webinars and online courses. Yep. What has amazed me is the number of webinars that there are available. I mean, if one has the time, one could spend an awful lot of time attending and giving webinars. Elvia, I really like engaging my class with Conversation Club. There's a way for them to actually use English in a communicative way, which is great. Okay, so if you were running a training course next year, what would you do? Would it be like the old type, or would it be online, or something different? And the next slide, which you are right, Samantha, yeah. This is something from a training course which I took part in November last year. Now, I don't know what stage the pandemic had got to in Peru in November last year. This was a training course in Europe. It was set up by a teaching association, which I work with quite often here in the UK. But it works very, very much in Central and Eastern Europe. So countries like Poland, Hungary, Czech Republic, Slovakia, Slovenia, etc., etc. And in all those countries in November, they were at the stage in the pandemic where no teaching in schools, all schools closed, any teaching was online. Quite a lot of them were working in countries where the children didn't have access to particularly good equipment, but some of them did. As teachers, they were feeling isolated because they couldn't go out. So a group of us put together a talk, which a course, which we called A November to Remember. And it was, we said it was a hop on, hop off course. In other words, you didn't have to stay at the beginning. You could hop in, hop out. And I think, if I remember, it started out as 2 evenings a week, and then it extended to 3. And then by the end, it was every single evening of the week. And the interesting thing was that I felt, and some of my colleagues felt, the most important thing for those teachers was the contact, because they were feeling very isolated. To be in contact with colleagues in another country or in their own country who was also feeling isolated, was having to invent things as they went along. The great thing for them was this feeling of contact. And what happened during the month was that there was the hour of contact, as it were, where we discussed various aspects of teaching. And people brought ideas, and some people videoed things and so on. But the great thing was the contact, and people wanted to stay on after the hour of the training session to just talk, chat. And what one saw over the month was friendships developing, people in different countries who'd never met themselves live before, but feeling that they could support each other and had something to give. And I think that the question, what would you want an online training course to provide for you now, might well include this aspect of communication, sharing problems with people, feeling that you're not alone, which I think with the sort of old style training courses wasn't sort of necessary. That they would focus much more on teaching reading or aspects of vocabulary or something, whereas the human contact, I think, is something that has changed a lot. So if you're interested in that, that link would take you to the organization SOL, which is Speaking One Language, and there's some more ideas, practical ideas there. Okay, thanks very much. So, another question to think about. Think of some of your students, and what I'd ask you to do is, pick 2 or 3 specific students of yours. What kind of support does each of them need, and how can you supply this? Now, it may be language support, it may be social support, it may be educational support, but as a teacher, we have to cope with an awful lot of different things. How can you support those particular students? And then you can apply, in a sense, the same question to yourself. Think about yourself. What support can you get from your colleagues? What support can you give to them? And how can you do this? And I think that it is important that as a teacher, one is a professional, but one is a person too. And this interaction as people, teacher to learner, learner to learner, teacher to teacher, is, I think, an important aspect of what we do. And certainly, I think the human element in training courses is something that we probably all have to think about. Okay, moving on. Here's another example. Enjoy our food, but keep each other safe. Now, that's an interesting, well, I think it's quite an interesting statement. Enjoy our food is like an invitation, but keep each other safe. So there's a warning and an invitation. And this using signs like this, and they could well be, they don't have to be in English, they could be in Spanish, but using them to say, but what's the message? Why does that sign use those words? What was trying to be communicated by the person who wrote that sign? That, I think, helps bring language to life, because it's linking language with real life. So, as I say, I've taken photographs, obviously, from where I live, of signs in English on the whole, but you could very well use them in Spanish and say, well, how would you, if you're in a place where foreign visitors are coming, how would you put that in English or French or German or another language to get over the message? You want to warn, but you also want to welcome. Okay? And here are some examples of language which I guess is not yet in most textbooks. I'd better not say in any textbook. Stay safe. This is something I find it, I began to find it quite irritating. When we were allowed to go out and meet people again, suitably distanced, instead of saying goodbye at the end of a conversation, the automatic phrase was stay safe. Now, it's very nice. You don't want people to get into problems, but it became a sort of a fairly meaningless phrase. And again, I'm sure it doesn't exist in any textbook at the moment. How are you doing? Was a sort of the first thing people would say, the beginning of a conversation. Are you self-isolating? As I think I said earlier on, I'd never used the phrase self-isolating before. What can you do? Now that sounds a pretty strange question, but of course, in context, it has a lot of meaning. You know, can you meet the family? Can you meet people indoors? Can you go to a shop? Do you have to wear a mask? And so on and so forth. So aspects of language have changed and worth looking at both locally, nationally, and internationally, I think. Okay. And I use the word internationally on purpose because a couple of signs here, just to remind ourselves that the pandemic is international. Sadly, it's not just in our countries. This is a photograph I took just about a year ago. There was a little window when we were allowed to travel, and I spend quite a lot of time in both France and Italy. And this was a sign at the entrance to the tunnel that goes under the channel between France and England. And the sign was there in English and French. And I think the next one also. Yeah. Thanks for practicing social distancing. Merci de respecter la distanciation physique. Again, if you're in an area where there are people of different nationalities coming, you have to get the message over in different ways. Okay. And this is a sign from just behind me by the riverside, warning people that even if they've had the vaccine, they still have to keep 2 meters apart. Okay. Right, next one. Yeah, that's it. So adapting and using. It's about time to be practical. We've thought about the context, we've thought about ourselves, we've thought about our learners, the things we've used, the things we've learned, the things we've used, the things we want to use, the things we never want to do again. How do we adapt the teaching and learning context we're in, and how do we adapt the materials that we have? And I think the best way of approaching that is to think about our objectives and our contexts. So are our objectives when we're teaching the same as the past, or have they changed? Has the context in which we're teaching, is it the same or is it different? Is it in a classroom or is it online or is it a mixture? And as the next slide says, don't forget the personal, because it is so easy as a teacher to focus on the language and forget about the personal. And I'll give you a practical example of this in a minute. So the next slide. Now, I don't know what textbooks you use, but I would guess that they have conversations in them between people. But in most textbooks, and I'm guilty of this in ones I've written or published as well, the people who are talking, the blah, 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 people who sometimes have photographs, they don't always come over as people. They come over more as characters. So a business person, a mother, a student, they're not people first foremost, they're characters. And it means that what they say, or how they talk in the textbook, is usually referred to as a dialogue. And again, it's something I do too. You know, look at the dialogue, do this, do that with the dialogue. But if we called it a conversation for me has implicitly implies real people involved in communicating in a real place for a real purpose. Next one. And when you communicate with other people, you have feelings, you have emotions, you may be stressed. If you think of yourself in various conversations with people, not in English, I mean, in any language, you know, think if you've got a headache, if you don't like the person, if you're nervous, if you're in a hurry, you're talking to somebody who goes on and on and on, you're in a hurry because you've got to get somewhere. How does it affect how you talk, how you listen, and how you interact with the other person? And one of the things I think that using textbook dialogues, conversations, we need to do much, much more is either identify who the people are, how they feel about each other, what their emotions are and their stress. And if it's not there in the textbook, if the photograph doesn't suggest it to you, or if you're using a video, if it's not clear, you know, spend some time doing a bit of speculation, because if the students can think of the people who are communicating as real people, as opposed to characters in a textbook or on a video, that will help them, will give them a model for their own interactions where emotions and feelings come into it. Okay? And emotions and feelings come into this to some extent because the last sentence on this sign is contributions from all sales go to National Health Service charities. And even in something as simple as a sign which is asking you or telling you to wear a face mask, there is an injection of the emotion, the feeling, the difficult situation in which we're all living, because the National Health Service here has obviously, as in all countries, has been under huge strain, suddenly having to deal with so many people who are ill. But coming back to what can we do to inject a bit of feeling into course book dialogues, this is a very simple example. It's from a series of textbooks, text material that I wrote for Brazil about 4 or 5 years ago. It was just before Brazil had the World Cup. Maybe it's 5 or 6 years ago. Anyway, I was in Brazil doing some other things, working with Macmillan and SBS to some extent in Brazil. And I had time to, because I was researching this book, I had time to observe a lot how people communicated, because the textbook series was aimed at people who were working in hotels, restaurants, taxi drivers, shopping malls, who wouldn't normally need to learn a foreign language, but because of the international international context of the World Cup, they were probably going to have to be faced with all kinds of native and non-native speakers of English or of other languages, but obviously largely English. And what I wanted to do was focus on how people communicated in real life situations and see how we could bring that into the material for students who were not academic, but actually had a need to communicate with foreigners in different situations. So I spent quite a bit of time sitting around in bars and hotels and taxi drivers and buses and so on. I didn't record anything. I didn't take photos because I felt that was intrusive, but I took a lot of notes. And this is something that we used in the course book. It was a couple, a man and a woman, in the bar of the hotel where I was staying, and they wanted to order something. And I'll show you the dialogue in a second, which is a sort of standard textbook dialogue. But what I noticed when I was sitting there was the behavior of the two foreigners with the waiter, who is a Brazilian. And they were incredibly rude. And if we go on to the next one, this is the dialogue we put, or conversation that we put in the textbook, which was my sort of simplified version of what was going on. Visitor one, I think, is the man. Yes, and the local person is the waiter. So visitor one says, he sounds quite polite at the beginning, "Excuse me." And the waiter says, "Yes." And the visitor says, "We want to order." And the waiter says, "Yes, what do you want?" And the visitor says, "Well, we want to see the menu." And the waiter, who's busy and worried and working in a very busy restaurant, says, "Oh, I'm sorry." And he starts going away. And the visitor says, "No, don't go away. We want to order some drinks now." And the waiter says, "Yes, of course. Well, what would you like?" Visitor says, "2 glasses of red wine. Can I see the wine list?" And the waiter says, "I'm sorry, I'm afraid we don't have glasses. A bottle?" Visitor says, "No, I don't want a bottle. Look, this is ridiculous." And the waiter says, "I'm sorry, we're very busy tonight." And the woman says, "Come on, let's go somewhere else. This is an awful place." Now, as I said, it's a simplification, but it's not much of a simplification of what I heard. And what struck me in communication, when people are out of their comfort zones, when they're nervous, when they're tired, and people who are traveling a lot, I travel a lot, and I think I'm quite a good traveler, but I know there are times when I'm more bad-tempered than I would be normally. All this is part of the communication. And if you're teaching students who are going to be waiters or working in a shopping mall or working in service industries, they may well have to confront bad behavior. And what I noticed when I was making the notes was it's not whether somebody uses the present perfect or the past simple or mispronounces something that stops the communication. It's actually the human behavior. And it seems to me that something that we can build into our teaching, whether we're doing it online or in the classroom, is to encourage the students not to look at a text like that just as language, but as something that real people are using to convey their feelings, their desires, what they want to another person. And if you can build in time when you're using a textbook dialogue to get the students to look at the photograph, or if you've got a video, freeze it at the beginning, speculate about the people, get them to think of them as people, not just characters. And I think that will help bring their own use of language, interactive language, to life. So something to apply to textbook dialogues. Okay? Right, a few more practical ideas, just, checking time. Right, projects. Making links for me is the link between the classroom or the learning environment and the real world. Projects, I find, project is a word that some teachers look horrified at, others absolutely love doing. But if you're using projects, I think be quite strict with yourself about why are you doing it? What does it involve? What does it involve? How will you go about it? And then, because it seems to me that projects, good projects, have a life beyond the classroom. And if we can go on to the next one, especially for those of you working in an educational context, I think projects involve group work or people working together, and they don't have to be doing it live. It can be done online interaction. I think it's just the same there. Projects involve personal skills. You know, some people are good at some things. Some people are good at, I don't know, taking photographs or anything that is personal. And a project gives an opportunity for personal skills to be used. Projects obviously can be done by individuals. They can be done in groups or by the whole class. But however you do them, they need an awful lot of organization. You can't just throw out a project and say, here's an exciting project, go and do this and come back at the next lesson. You need to organize the various stages. And above all, if they're working in groups or with another person, they need to organize themselves. So from an educational point of view, I think project work is very, very useful. I think it's important in the stages of a project to encourage the students to check as they go along. You know, they said they were going to find out various things. Well, how's it going? Maybe it was a bit overambitious. Maybe it's a bit boring. Maybe that information can't be found. Don't just start the project, wait, and then go to the end of it. Keep checking and encourage them to check as well. Another plus, I think, of a project in terms of life skills is that it's good if students have an opportunity to present their project, present what they've found out, what they've learned, what they've discovered. And again, up to them to choose the best medium for doing it. Are they going to do it online? Will they do it through photographs? Will they do it through acting out something? You know, lots and lots of ways, but get them to think about presentation. Because if we think of real life, which I think is one of the things I started with, presentation skills are really, really important in real life, aren't they? How you present yourself to another person. If you're going for an interview, a job interview, you know, how you present yourself. So the presentation of yourself and the presentation of material is very, very important. as a life skill. And equally important, I feel, in projects is encouraging students and giving them time and space to comment on each other's projects and react to receiving criticism, which is very difficult to do. If you've written something, and I know this is when I've been writing something, and I have to think of it the other way around if I'm acting as an editor or a publisher. If you write something, you want it to be as good as it possibly can be. You do it, you show it to a colleague, and they say, oh, for goodness sake, Susan, no, that doesn't make sense. Why did you do this? Why did you do that? And you feel deflated. You've put a lot of work and effort into it, and somebody, they may be right, they may be wrong, but reacting to criticism and reacting positively to it is, I think, a skill, a life skill, which again, more and more we need in real life, and important to follow up, not let the project just go dead. As I've said, projects begin with people, important to think about the context, make links between cultures, make comparisons, and ask questions. And an example of this on the next one. Right, this is an example of something I've used in various training courses. It's a photograph I took in Brazil 3 or 4 years ago. I was in Belo Horizonte. This was a shopping mall, and it had this eye-catching name. And if you say it aloud, you know what they sell. You know what they sell when you say it aloud if you understand the English. And this is in a city which I don't think, it's not a tourist centre. It certainly has a lot of visitors from all over the place. But it's not a tourist centre per se. And I was intrigued as to why they would give themselves that name, which to a Portuguese speaker, ice cream, does it really mean ice cream, or does it mean something different? I don't know, but it's playing with language. And I was involved in an online conference, again with Brazil, last month with Brastiço, where somebody I know quite well, an old friend who lives half the time in Brazil. He's married to a Brazilian and is actually teaching in China at the moment. He used examples from the Brazilian provincial town, I think it's not a city, where he lives, of the names of cafes and restaurants and shop signs which used foreign languages in a place which you would say they're not doing that to attract foreigners, because there wouldn't actually be many foreign visitors there. But it would be quite interesting, I think, to go out into a street in Lima or wherever and look at the names of shops and stores and see how they mix language, how they use culture and cross-culture, and what the reason is. Is it to attract foreigners? Is it to show that they're a bit, glossy and better than other places, or what? But the signs of things, shop signs, are I think, a treasure trove for looking at use of language. And that brings me on to something I've called mini projects. Just another 5 minutes to go. Projects, as I said, sometimes are a bit nerve-wracking for teachers because they imply a lot of time. Something I've used quite often is what I call mini projects, which are giving the students something to do to make a link between the end of one lesson and the beginning of another. Now, this, I think, is especially important with adults, because adults, well, I suppose everybody has a busy life. But one of the problems if you're teaching adult or business students is they're with you 100% in the class online or really. And then they get it back into their lives. And then on the next Monday, they're back into the next lesson. If you can give them something to do that links the two classes, that isn't just learning vocabulary, that can help. So the example I had for this mini project at the end of a lesson was to say, ask the students to make a note of local stores or companies with foreign names. And hopefully the student will be responsible and think, I must remember to check out stores and companies. And then at the beginning of the next lesson, next slide, you can ask, what did you find? What do they do? Are they international? What do the names tell you? Are they easy to pronounce or easy to remember? You can use what they brought. And this is just 5 minutes at the end of a lesson, 5 minutes at the beginning, but it's making a link between one lesson and another, but also giving the students the responsibility for doing research either in the street or online. I've got another 2 examples, I think, the next one. Yes, if you're in a place where foreign visitors, tourists go to the tourist office, go to the information office, look at the leaflets that are around, what useful information is there for foreign visitors, and so ask the students to visit the local tourist office. And then they think, oh, I must remember to check. No, they should be remembering to check out the tourist office. Sorry, that's my mistake on the slide. And the next one. Think about the names, think about the information, and so on. I think I've repeated the slides here. Can we go on to the next one? And the next one. Think about online stuff, and think about is the problem of communication technical, or is it language related? Is it time related or person related? And what's the best and worst example of what you can find? So encouraging the students to use their environment if it's possible, but also to research online is, I think useful. Okay, next slide. So what we've been talking about is past, present, and future, because something is happening to all of us, which is making those 3 words have a particular meaning. What I think we all need to be doing is learning from experience, our own personal experiences, and this affects training, teaching, resources, and the way we find, make, and use materials. And this means, I think, that we should be reflecting, selecting, adapting, and using things that work for our own particular contexts and objectives. And what I think is useful for all of us to do is think about yourself as a person and as a professional, and go through this year, next year thought process for yourself. Ask, what are the positive and negative things from the past to the present? Are there any unexpected benefits? Some of you have said that you like doing various things online, which you probably haven't done before. And what would you hope to retain and carry forward to your life and work next year? Okay. So we're now almost at the end. Just to stress the personal aspect of all of us, this was my office last summer. I have a house with a garden. We weren't allowed to go out, so I did quite a lot of work in the garden. As you see, helped with a glass of wine. Okay, next one. One of the things I've been very concerned with as a publisher and as a materials writer over the years is the aspects of the non-native teacher as opposed to the native speaker of a language, and how native and non-native teachers are perceived and valued. And as a publisher, I worked with an old friend, Peter Medgyes, who is a Hungarian, in fact, over the years, because there have been 2 or 3 editions of this book, to ask questions about the pluses and minuses of non-native teachers, and how we can get employers to realize that what is important is being a good and well-trained teacher, and whether you're native or non-native is probably not very important. So being a good teacher is, I think, the key thing. And that's a book we published a few years ago. Next one. And this one I referred to before, Teaching English Today, which I think will now have to be revised, having only published it 2 years ago, but it'll have to have a few more questions in, the kind of thing that we've been talking about this evening. Next one. Yes, our work environments have changed. I don't spend all the time in the garden, but that's the computer I'm talking to you from at the moment. And, you know, that is my workspace, or has been for the last 18 months. Next one. That is a reminder of where I'm actually based in Scotland. And that is probably unexpected, but that is where I would like to be at this moment. And the next one, you may guess, it's Venice. I lived in Venice on and off for 15 years. I've got a lot of friends and some family there, and I can't travel. And so that's mentally where I would like to be if I wasn't talking to you at this moment. Hopefully I can get to Venice in October. And finally, the final picture. This is one I've used quite often. As you saw from the picture of my garden, there's a river that goes down the side. This is a photograph I took last summer of 2 swans and 3 cygnets, young swans. And for me, it sums up what good teaching is about. The 2 adults are looking at the young swans, but they're not interfering. They're keeping an eye on them. And if anything goes wrong, they could step in, I was about to say, swim in and help them. But those 3 little swans are going to have to grow themselves into big swans and be responsible. And it seems to me that as a good teacher, this is what one should be doing, or a good teacher trainer. You're not interfering, you're keeping an eye on your students, you know when to help them, but actually they've got to do it themselves. And I think whether we're teaching English today, yesterday, tomorrow, that is actually what we should be doing as teachers. Asking questions, thinking about ourselves and our students' need, and providing a framework where things can actually be constructive. And that's it. I hope it was useful. That's me. I've no idea what the future will bring. It would be very nice if I could come and visit you in Peru for real this time next year. That's my email. And if you've got any questions or comments, do please email me. And because I'm not traveling much, I do answer emails pretty quickly. And I would love to hear from you. And I'm hoping to be able to read the chat thing at leisure. Thank you. Thank you very, very much. And SBS, thank you very, very much for organising this, and above all for your help and support to make it all work technically. Thank you very much. And good luck with your teaching.